So this is actually a cool spot because this is the tomb or the crypt of a guy named W.F. Jones. And when Joshua Sykes, Emmanuel, Yahweh, whatever you want to call the guy, when he died at the house of Andrew Yahweh, the disciples came in the middle of the night to take the body because he was staying at the house of one of his other church parishioners, right? So they took his body. They were afraid that he might have committed suicide because he was despondent at the fact that the Queen of Heaven and Earth, Marie Freed, had left him and gone to Hollywood to be in the motion pictures. So they didn't know if he had offed himself. So they got the body and they brought it to the house of this Andrew Yahweh guy, and they were delayed calling the coroner because they didn't know, they thought he was going to rise from the dead, ultimately speaking. So they kind of wrapped him in a shroud and kept him on a metal table or a cot in the back of this little ramshackle house. We're going to go and try to find that place next. And so they kept him there, and then the coroner showed up and demanded that they have the body, and then there was a big back and forth feud between the two of them, and the coroner gave him a certain amount of time, I think it was 72 hours or something like that, to actually get their act together, and if he hadn't risen from the dead, he was coming to get the body. So they got the coroner eventually came in and got the body, and they took it down to the morgue, and then they took it to a funeral home. And after a period of time, the followers were still wanting and waiting, and they didn't want to inter him and bury him because he was supposed to rise from the dead. So they settled on a compromise, and the coroner said that they could bring him to this crypt. So this crypt had been abandoned by the Jones family back when. So if you look in the newspaper articles, and I can put like a picture for you, you'll see the followers of Yahweh bringing him and escorting him right into this crypt here. So he laid in state in this crypt, got here on a Thursday night or a Thursday afternoon, evening. They shuttled him in here, and he stayed here for a couple of days until finally they succumbed or acquiesced to the fact that he wasn't rising from the dead, in which case they relocated him into the north part of the cemetery over up in lot 14 in the cheapest part of the cemetery in an unmarked grave. But so this was his temporary final resting place, to be followed by his final resting place, which is just up north of here. But this is kind of the progression of things as they went. So.
You can kind of see, like, here through this.
Yeah.
I don't think
This is lot 14, I think. No, block 14, lot 8. He was buried in an unmarked grave number 47. So it's really tough to kind of find it because there's not a lot of rhyme or reason. You can look around. Feels like a very old spaghetti western kind of grave here. It's turned into an industrial center. It wouldn't have been that way back at the time, but this graveyard kind of struggled. So what we're able to do here is kind of piece it all together, because this gravestone right over here, which is Baptista Leone, that's gravestone I think number 20. This one over here with Holger Hartman is like 24. And if you look at the dates, these are all like 1928, 1928 over there. You start to get over here into William Corkery, James Campbell. This is all 1929 vintage there. And you start to look at the dates, and this is February 21st. So this was only about a month before, not even that, it's only a couple weeks before they actually buried Sykes. So chances are, if you look in the background, this little scraggly tree right here, he's gonna be buried right in here. They're got a lot of this loose soil here. There's these little tiny squares that have numbers on them. So buried underneath this soil is probably the grave identifier that would show you specifically where but it's in within a 20 square foot area right here. So if you imagine, we're coming from this direction over here, this is where the mausoleum was. They had a pull cart. They pulled him up here in the casket, and the whole procession of all the followers, the Jehovahites, the Yahwehites, they were in tow to bury their leader, who they half still expected was going to rise from the dead. And then coming screaming in at the last second to this funeral procession was the Queen of Heaven and Earth, pulling up in a sports car with this young stud on her side that she's been hanging out with Hollywood shooting more motion pictures, coming in at the last second trying to show up and pay her last respects to the king of all heaven and earth, Joshua Sykes. And she's got his 3 kids in tow, dressed to the nines in all of her latest styles of the roaring 20s, and pulling up, and all the congregation kind of turns and looks at her and like, who are you, like coming in all Hollywood on this thing. But this was the spot, you know, where it all ended. And it's kind of ironic, you got someone looks like they're digging up the grave over here, but as far as we can tell, he didn't rise from the dead, unless that's him trying to get out right now. He's still here in Turkey, final resting place of Joshua, Jehovah, Emmanuel, Yahweh, Sykes, King of Heaven and Earth. So that's the rest of the story.